Linguistic imperialism, let's first have a recap about the topics we discussed last meeting. So, multilingualism refers to two or more languages either by individual speaker or a community. It is derived from two Latin words which is multi means two or more and lingual means language. We call a person who can communicate in more than language a multilingual. Also, there are different types of multilingualism, which are the individual multilingualism, societal multilingualism, and under that, we have the additive and subtractive multilingualism, and also the balanced and unbalanced multilingualism. Lastly is the receptive multilingualism. We also quoted M.A.K. Halliday, where he stated that language is a political institution. Language policy is about deciding on the networking of languages where it enables members of who work in a particular language combination to a network with each other, sharing information in a supportive and collaborative environment. And it is decision made by the government that includes determining how languages are used and addressing the linguistic needs of of a country, community, or individual. Language hierarchy, on the other hand, refers to the structured ranking of languages within a society, where there are majority and minority languages. We also have the dominant versus minority languages, public versus private domain, functional distribution of languages, legislative and policy hierarchies, cultural and social hierarchies, and lastly, economic hierarchies. And we have the three types of government language policies, which are the elimination, tolerance, and promotion of multilingualism. Under the role of government, we have the policy authority, representation of interest, implementation challenges, and in the community needs, we have the local knowledge, preferences, demand for inclusion, trust, and engagement. And marginalized communities, we have here the inequality and power dynamics, the symbolic versus substantive recognition, and distrust and government. In linguistic diversity, we have the stability versus instability, market forces, and need for comprehensive approaches. Under the implementation of language policies are the equitable opportunities need for the collaborative approaches and the balancing interest. That's all for the recapitulation, and now let's talk about linguistic imperialism.
Thank you for the recap, Paul. And now, as I've mentioned last on-site meeting, linguistic imperialism proposed by Philipson in 1992 with the main goal of explaining the hierarchy of languages, address why some languages are more dominant than others, identify what structures and ideologies facilitate this process, and determine language professional rules. It is formed by structural and cultural inequality between English and other languages. When we say structural inequality, it refers to inequality related to material wealth. And cultural inequality refers to non material or ideological inequality. Linguistic imperialism first came into being through colonization and military power, and then more subtly through economic, social, and cultural penetration. Philipson, in 2012, also argued that linguistic imperialism is still alive and kicking instead of being a thing of the past. In 1992, Philipson clarified that the development of linguistic imperialism went through three stages. The first stage is imposing the colonizer's power and language. The second stage is training a group of local elites and privileged classes who serve the benefit of the colonies. And the third is the stage and the third stage is the ideological persuasion using media and technology. The linguistic imperialism theory has positive and negative influences. The positive influences are: first, according to Shao in 2009, it aroused people's attention to the world language ecology. Second, it promotes scholars' research on language policy, language planning, and the position of English in applied linguistics. On the other hand, the negative influences are: first, according to Shannon in 1995, it diminishes the use and value of minority languages and completely displaces them. Second, it creates inequality among languages. And lastly, weaker languages will disappear. And according to Shao in 2009, the theory of linguistic imperialism is the best example of how language status shapes society and influences language policy. It clearly explains how imperialist languages, mainly the English, French, and Spanish, were promoted in colonial countries through their dominance in economic, political, social, cultural, educational, and other fields. And the influence of English language imperialism itself have also gone beyond education. As we can observe, no language can replace English in world politics, economy, science and technology, media, scholarly, communication, entertainment, and etc. English has become an essential determinant of social and economic progress in many countries, and a gatekeeper to higher socioeconomic status for individuals and periphery countries. And next, linguistic neo-imperialism, a relatively concept developed in the field of economics. And according to you in 2020, the scholars studying neo-imperialism state that it is the final stage of imperialism because significant capital is separated from the product itself and relies on its power to appropriate the benefits. The linguistic neo-imperialism departs from the former notion that colonizers impose and determine the use of capital, in this case, their language. I've also mentioned this last meeting that the colonizers impose their language. And now, that imposition and aggression of external forces are no longer at play. So, now, hindi na nila ini-impose yung language nila since the English language is already a dominant language, means that they don't it is not necessarily necessary to impose that anymore since people would use that language um voluntarily, since uh if they want to have or to be included, as what Sam also said in the last meeting, if they want to be included in the modernization. And next, the neo-imperialism in the English language is of linguistic hegemony, mainly out of political and commercial considerations. And linguistic imperialism is no longer confined to colonial territories in today's globalized world, but maintains and expands its global influence as the world's lingua franca. Yun na nga. And hence, linguistic neo-imperialism is the hegemonic power of a language motivated by internal dynamism from the ground. And the following features of linguistic neo-imperialism are: first, locally driven. The local people themselves have initiated and maintained the status and use of the colonial or imperial language because of the economic value that goes with it. The second is structurally motivated because of the bargaining demand of the use a unifying language. Social institutions prescribe the use of this language for inclusion and conformity. Ayun nga, if they want to be included. And third, colonial and imperial attitude. Although colonizers have been out of the feature of these ex-colonies for several decades, the people still lingers in the superior inferior asymmetry, which is informed by the role of the race as a key differentiating instrument of social control and hierarchization, according to Tupas in 2022. And in turn, local people still think that the indigenous languages are inferior. Example of these are the regional or uh, the in regional or in national scope languages, while dominant languages are superior, the international and the standard languages. And the fourth feature is the normally actualized. Not only is the use of the former inferior language structurally entrenched, but it is likewise made to appear as a status quo in the society. It is not made to appear as neo-colonial but simply normal. And according to Gradle in 1997, he explained other features of linguistic neo-imperialism from the domains of communication, business, academia, and education. And the following subsections exemplify the above features and how they manifest in the specific domains classified by Gradle. Linguistic neo-imperialism in the domain of international communication. English has become one of the major languages for internal communication. In global communications, English has unquestionably become the first choice language, not only because people worldwide choose it voluntarily. It is also the result of nearly 100 years of relentless efforts by Britain and the United States to promote English worldwide. And based on the annual reports of the British Council, it is discovered that promoting overseas English education can be beneficial to establish permanent and good cultural relations with foreigners. For instance, in international organizations and conferences, English is not only a critical intermediary language for translation, but also a lingua franca, as English is considered as the world's lingua franca. Many leaders and officials of non English speaking countries can use English to deliver speeches at international conferences, which shows that extraordinary vitality of English as a language used in international communication. Um, English is also used by netizens in popular social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, X, and etc as their preferred language of communication. There are English words that the Oxford English Dictionary listed, such as netizen, selfie, twerk, tweet, GIF, and others that are coined from the social media platforms. And next, linguistic neo-imperialism in the domain of business. English as a medium of communication in global business is undeniable. According to I in 2018, there is an initiative to strengthen and innovate the teaching of business English in countries where English is not a primary language of trade and business, like, for example, the China, which is aimed at a globalized business context. The use of English is also at the fore in multilingual workspaces or businesses whose nature is communicating to various target markets. And according to Angry and Migbauer, in 2014, English has become the uncontested language of business in the context of globalized workplace. With the presence of multilingual and multicultural human resources in international companies and the prospective market, it is normal that English becomes the dominant language and lingua franca in communication. Hence, in this context, English is expected as the working language. And next, linguistic neo-imperialism in the domain of academia. In academia, English has become the first language of publication, with most papers published in this language. English status as a global academic lingua franca is not just because of linguistic imperialism, but the result of a combination of factors. This includes the excellent research resources, the development of bibliographic databases, and citation indexes, and the long history of the English academic language. Major scientific and academic journals are published in English. In turn, research writing and publication have naturally used English as the language in the writing domain. And last, linguistic neo-imperialism in the domain of education. Many people in post-colonial countries regard English as a stepping stone to success, a gatekeeper to higher education and higher social status, according to Sibayan and Gonzalez in 1996, and also Lai in 2019. Despite the multilingual communities or non-English language ecologies of these Asian countries, their educational system have patronized the use of English as the medium of instruction, and English is one of the content taught across levels. The educational systems have reinforced the power of English, which has resulted in the perceived practical use of English as the language used to talk to foreigners, according to Ponce and Lucas in 2021, and as an index of intelligence, according to Beacon and Kim in 2018. And English language education plays a crucial role in social and economic development, whether from the perspective of individual development needs or enterprise and national development strategy. Learning a language, especially English, is a human capital investment with real value. It helps people acquire more knowledge and information, acquire more human capital, and bring more economic benefits. And the following table Right. Okay. The following table shows summarized features of English linguistic neo-imperialism and its exemplifications in the major domains and how they manifest in this and how are they manifest in the specific domains classified by Gradle. How does international communication, business, academia, and education exemplify in the features of English linguistic neo-imperialism, which are the locally driven, the number one, number two, the structural motivated, number three, the colonial or imperial attitude, and number four, the normally actualized. We will just send a copy of our presentations in the G class stream. Thank you.
The next slide po. So at this juncture, we will now be discussing language revitalization. Language revitalization involves the restoration or strengthening of a particular language in regions where it prevailed before being displaced by other more powerful or prestigious languages. Now, from the word itself, revitalization, this talks about bringing something back to life. These are efforts or process aimed at reviving, maintaining, and promoting the use of language which are endangered or no longer spoken fluently by a community. An example of languages that are now endangered are Ainu, spoken in Japan, Patwin, native and American language, Yarawi, spoken in Morobe province, Alawa, spoken in Australia, and the Hawaiian language that we know is already endangered now, which leaves 300 native speakers worldwide. Now, language revitalization transcends a linguistic concern, touching on other cultural, social, and identity aspects of language use. As we all know, language serves as our identity. Language carries our culture and it helps pass it on from one generation to generation. So language unites us. It makes us who we are as a language, as a community. So let me ask you this. If language is to die, who would you be or who would we be? So it is important to revive it, promote it, and maintain it through language revitalization, making it a linguistic concern and a need for us to do so. Next slide, please. So now you might wonder, why does a language die anyway? There are many reasons why language die, but some of the most common reasons are globalization, which is defined as the exchange of goods or services across borders. Next is assimilation, when a person or group of people adopts a culture of another. Next is genocide, disease or natural disasters, and destruction of indigenous communities. As for globalization and assimilation, whether for work, education, or refuge, it can lead to diminished use of language. As communities disperse, people are being influenced and people assimilate into new linguistic environment. As they interact with others, of course, they learn more about it and get more accustomed to that language, which leads to the diminished use of it. As for genocide, disease, and natural disasters, well, we know that language is carried by people as they are spoken by people. So if you die due to various reasons, as I mentioned, language dies with you, language dies with them. And that goes the same way for destruction of indigenous communities. So what can we do so that a language wouldn't die? Next slide, please. There are efforts aimed for the preservation of language and culture. Number one is the documentation projects to document endangered languages and make information available. But in nowadays, in these modern days, internet can be a good way in documenting language. For example, the websites that we see on the internet when we Google something, and even the apps that we use when we are learning a language, Duolingo, for instance, and even social medias. The post that we see on Facebook, Instagram, or even X can be a way to document it. Even the post that you put in your accounts is a great means of documenting a language. But apart from that, books can also be a way in documenting a language, and also dictionaries that you use every day when you are reading. Next is restoration programs to involve younger generations, indigenous communities, frequently spearhead revitalization initiatives by establishing language immersion schools, workshops, and cultural festivals. I believe it was already mentioned by Samantha last meeting about mother tongue. Mother tongue as a subject can be an example of restoration programs. Nowadays, children are very immersed in internet. The most used language in internet is English, and it is not entirely impossible that they might forget their language, their dialect, which is why DepEd implemented this subject in elementary to prevent such happening and also to have appreciation for their own dialect. Next, please. Next is legislation and policies. Some governments recognize the importance of preserving their linguistic heritage and enact policies to support endangered languages through education and media. Well, there's actually a law that was passed on here in the Philippines, known as Republic Act number 7104, passed last August 14, 1991. In section 4, it reads creation of the Commission on the Filipino Language. There is hereby created a commission to be known as the Commission on the Filipino Language, composed of representatives of various ethno-linguistic groups in different disciplines, which shall undertake, coordinate, and promote researches for the development, propagation, and preservation of Filipino and other Philippine languages, and which shall be directly under the Office of the Philippines. So basically, this law talks about promoting, preserving, and developing the Filipino language and other Philippine languages. This law includes formulating policies, plans, and programs, creating and maintaining a division of translation, conducting public hearings, conferences, seminars, and other group discussion, and formulating and adopting guidelines, standards, system for monitoring, and reporting. And for the last is international collaboration. Organizations like UNESCO supports initiative to protect endangered languages through awareness campaigns, funding, and policy recommendations. Now, in this part, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization have actually adopted and implemented IMLD, which is International Mother Language Day, last 1999, and it is actually celebrated every 21st of February. This is to promote linguistic and cultural diversity, multilingualism, and language protection. Because UNESCO believes that language are powerful tools for preserving and developing heritage. So on this activity that UNESCO have on this day, it UNESCO highlights the importance of safeguarding indigenous languages, hosts, and countries to, to pursue multilingual education, and of course, it urges the governments to embrace multilingual education based on their mother tongue. Next po. And so that's about it. And for me to finally conclude, we have discussed multilingualism, which talks about how a speaker or a community speaks to more languages. We also discussed language policies, where it can reinforce existing power hierarchies by privileging dominant languages and marginalizing minority languages, or challenge them by promoting linguistic diversity and empowering underrepresented communities. These policies can profoundly affect marginalized communities by either promoting linguistic diversity and cultural heritage, exacerbating social inequalities, leading to the erosion of minority language and identities. We have also discussed language imperialism, which is the imposition of a dominant language over others, often perpetuating global language hierarchies and marginalizing minority languages and cultures, leading to inequalities in access to opportunity, education, and social integration. So to prevent that, to prevent this imperialism, marginalization, and erosion, we have this language revitalization is important, which, as discussed, is the reviving of language through documentation projects, restoration programs, legislation policies, and international collaboration. That would be all. Thank you. If there are any questions, feel free to ask. And the quiz will be posted right after this. Thank you po.